I think that appointing Dr. Powell to this position has proved to be a wise decision. Mr. Chairman, this hearing on the Federal Reserve Transparency Act of 2009, which is sponsored by our colleague Dr. Powell and I think the vast majority of the Republicans on the committee. In his role as ranking member of the subcommittee on domestic monetary policy and technology, Dr. Powell has been a consistent champion of the taxpayer and a strong advocate for greater transparency and accountability at the Federal Reserve. Americans are tired of paying for Wall Street's mistakes with costly bailouts, many of which have been funded by the Federal Reserve. Over the last year and a half, the Fed has used its authority under Section 13(3) of the Federal Reserve Act to conduct a series of extraordinary interventions into the financial markets that have doubled the size of its balance sheet to over $2 trillion. In fact, in testimony yesterday before the committee, the Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker expressed his own misgivings about invoking 13(3). He said, "I have mixed minds about that because I squirm when it's used, frankly. We spent a lot of time trying to avoid its use because we knew if it ever got used, it would become a precedent of the future." That's why the Republicans on this committee have introduced our alternative reform bill, which actually does not allow the Fed to invoke 13(3). And most of us were at the hearing the day before yesterday when we urged Secretary Geithner to say there would be no bailouts and he would not be invoking 13(3). And he actually declined to say that he wouldn't use it and use as much as $1 trillion in a bailout, which should have shocked a lot of people and should have been headline news around this country. Just this week, the Federal Open Market Committee voted unanimously to extend its program to purchase $1.2 trillion worth of mortgage-backed securities and up to $200 billion of agency debt through the first quarter of next year. In fact, before our eyes, we're seeing what Chairman Frank said last year when he said with President Obama and a strong Democratic Senate, we can get the federal government back in the housing business. We're seeing that happen. He was right. In fact, we're talking about the Federal Reserve. They're the biggest holder of U.S. government debt, not private companies, not China, not the Middle East. It's the Federal Reserve. They are buying, according to the Wall Street Journal, 50% of all new treasuries issued by the Treasury. That was in the second quarter. And they buy a good portion of the GSE bonds that Fannie and Freddie issue. So you have one government agency buying another government agency's debt. We've shifted debt from the private sector onto the U.S. government taxpayers back. And now we have one government agency, in a way, bailing out another government agency. It's a classic example of, the Fed bailing out the Federal Reserve, the Fannie bailing out the Treasury. And, you wonder who is going to bail out the U.S. government. And I think the taxpayers have figured out it's we, the taxpayers. And that's one reason why we desperately need
let me just say to the gentleman,
this legislation.